Netanyahu is now calling for an end to UNRWA.
What's the role of warring media narratives in the fight over Gaza's most important source of aid? I asked a U.S. senator.
I have looked at.
I just listen to them all the time. I take it into the shower, and every so often I'll see myself doing that, and I'm like, wow, this gotten a little out of hand. I don't know if this is okay.
So, as probably a lot of people know, yesterday a majority of the Northeast was hit with a 4.8 earthquake on the Richter scale. From, I believe, Boston to Baltimore, with the epicenter of the quake actually taking place not too far away from me in New Jersey, in the township of Lebanon, which is where I am this morning at sunrise. Because it wasn't really that big of a quake. Where I was situated at the time, it felt like a passing train. Like the building I was in was like right next to train tracks, and it was like a huge just freighter train like barreling through the intersection. And that lasted for all of probably 30 seconds. So nothing too harrowing. It was more confusing than anything else, because I was like, I'm nowhere near train tracks from what I can recall of the geography of the area. And while there was some wind, it didn't feel like wind, and I wasn't in a building or a structure that was high enough for me to register like, oh, wind turbulence or anything like that. No, it had a very distinct, just a very subtle shaking, rumbling feeling. And even later on the day, because there were aftershocks, of course, reverberating throughout the day. Even then, those were like, again, about 20 seconds of just feeling like there was a freight train nearby. And yeah. And I know a lot of people probably on the West Coast who may watch this are like, earthquakes, yeah, whatever, join the club. Deal with like probably far, far more drastic, more perilous situations with their earthquakes compared to what we experienced yesterday. But again, it's a little confusing, a little outside the realm of normality for people on this side of the country to have that be an occurrence, not a regular occurrence, but an occurrence nonetheless. I actually have experienced 2 quakes since being here on the East Coast. One here yesterday, and one several years ago when I was living in New York City. I was... Move, bird. I was living on the Lower East Side, on the top floor of an apartment building on the Lower East Side. Just reading, listening to music, whatever, I can't remember exactly. And it was that very distinct feeling then, when you're on like the top level of a very high building and there is, say, wind blowing through, and these are older structures, so they have a little bit of give. Not enough to make it like a disaster, but enough to definitely make you notice, sit straight up and be like, so that's what it felt like the building was somewhat swaying in the breeze. And I was like, okay, that's different. And then I went to the window because I heard car alarms going off. I heard people out in the streets clamoring more than usual for about probably like close to noon New York City traffic or hustle and bustle. And I saw in the distance, going down the street in Alphabet City, dust or, you know, like residue off the tops of all the buildings. Apparently just like briefly puff up and then start to cascade. And I could tell like it was happening to my building too. And it just, you could see it like a domino effect, like ripples of dust just kind of like, and I was like, okay, so yeah, earthquakes happen out here too. That was my first exposure to the idea like, oh, it's not just San Andreas fault that you get stuff like that. I mean, there are fault lines all over the place on this planet, and plate tectonics is gonna ebb and flow as time goes on at its own pace, and it was definitely a new experience that I took note of. And again, when yesterday occurred, I took note of that, but nothing too harrowing, nothing too perilous, and as far as I know, not many hazardous situations cropped up due to yesterday. So I know I made wood to knock on here, so I'll just hope that we can just go on, even though there might be apparently aftershocks for the next day or two after, which, like I said, I made note of later on in the afternoon after the initial quake. Was some rumblings here and there, but nothing, again, too hazardous. So I don't know what it is about again, sort of my go-to response in light of anything outside the norm for me in my everyday life is to all of a sudden just do something sporadic. Like, I don't know, I was feeling extremely restless throughout the night. And found myself, I got sleep, but found myself waking up at like 4 a.m. on a Saturday. And just couldn't find the gumption to go back to sleep. And so I thought, you know what? Let's just do a little morning hike out by the epicenter. So I'm at this, it's a mountain preserve, but it's not really that mountainous, obviously. More hill preserve, I suppose. And it's only about 4 miles or so away from the Lebanon Township, which I'm not going to go into. It's like, let those people have their ease and rest. And yeah, just gonna meander a little bit. Whoa. So was too late to capture it, but there was just like a distant boom. I mean, not like a boom, boom, but a rumble. Like, again, aftershocks, so they're still happening. Like, I'm not kidding. I just like felt it. I felt the ground beneath me just like quiver a little. That was, and now I hear like animals in the distance kind of acting up, getting ornery. Jeez Louise. It's definitely outside the norm for us here. So weird. But interesting. I should clarify too that when I say interesting, or when I express like a really kind of curious fixation or fascination with yesterday's events, I don't mean at all to diminish or to take away from genuine loss of life or livelihood or what have you in the wake of devastating natural disasters such as earthquakes. I don't mean to like diminish what people go through when there is a very significant tectonic event. Not at all. It's just, it's so out of the scope of normality for a lot of us out here. And the fact that when it does occur, it is very minimal what degree of damage or ramifications there really are. So certainly my empathy and my condolences go out to those who do genuinely suffer and deal with the ramifications of more severe quakes or more severe natural disasters. But they are, they're part of the natural world, and I do have a genuine curiosity about when those occurrences take place within my sphere of existence. It's fairly pedestrian, my day to day. So when something memorable like that occurs, I make note of it. It's funny, I was listening to WNYC yesterday and after the quake, and they were taking questions, calling in. They were originally just talking about the upcoming eclipse. It's going to take place on Monday, but then decided to take some questions, of course, regarding the quake and any information that could be provided. And I had one caller in be like, yeah, will the quake affect the pending eclipse? And I had a really long, hard laugh at that. Like, I was almost crying to be like, oh man, dude. That's the thing, it's like conspiracies abound immediately in the wake of out of the norm phenomena like that. It's like automatically people try to make sense of the senseless, even though it is senseless, even though there is no anticipating it. There is no sometimes specific explanation or correlation outside of just the regular ebb and flow of the planet itself. And to kind of be like, you think this event that's going to involve heavenly bodies way, way, way beyond the scope of what's going on down here on terra firma, you think what happens down here is going to impact in any way what takes place up there. And it really, I don't know, it really put a sense of perspective, not just on the scope of nature and the universe in general, but also on the scope of, let's call it human creativity to connect dots where there are none. But I had a good laugh at that, man. There was one lady who called in, and from the sound of it, she was an older woman. Apparently lived like right in the epicenter in Lebanon, where the initial quake took place. And she talked about like what she experienced for that. I guess she said it felt like more like a minute and a half of shaking and turbulence. And she talked about things, you know, falling off the wall, portraits falling off the wall, glasses getting knocked over, spackle coming loose from her ceiling and things like that. But there was very much this intensity in her voice. Definitely fear, in that it was so harrowing for her in that moment, and the sense of powerlessness that she felt. Even though ultimately in the end everything was okay, you could tell in her voice she was still shaken. And again, from what I could hear, from what I picked up on, it sounded as though she was much older. And again, it got me thinking about my own folks and how they, you know, are managing for themselves now, but they are older. Things don't come as easily to them as they once did. And I started having a little bit of some transference of my own situation, my own mindset onto the caller's experience, where I had a little bit of a mini breakdown listening to her talk about what she went through. Even though she's fine, even though we're all fine, to hear legitimate kind of fear in her voice, to hear about that helplessness that she felt for that brief amount of time, but how much that brief amount of time can just become all-consuming. And again, like I said, I thought about people in my life who are maybe in that age range. How would they deal with that particular situation if it occurred where they live? So to that caller, I hope you're having a good morning. I hope today is certainly less stressful and less overwhelming for you. This creek is flowing. Makes sense. We've had a lot of rain the past couple of days. Only just was clear on Thursday and yesterday. And then, I don't know, maybe the events of yesterday shook something a little bit looser in terms of water flow. Now there's my stupidity kind of coming through, or at least my ignorance of how the planet works coming through. I know an earthquake's not going to affect the eclipse, but surely the shifting of tectonic plates affects the water that flows over it to some degree. Man, it is flowing pretty hard this morning. It's probably enough for now. Again, it's just kind of my natural response to things that occur way outside of my wheelhouse of normality, is to break routine, get lost for a little bit. Definitely have a head start on the day. So that's my story about the quake and the aftershocks. Again, in the grand scheme, not the most turbulent occurrence in my life. Probably not the most turbulent occurrence in a lot of people's lives out here. But still worth mentioning, still worth making note of. Because again, whether it's some grand world-altering event or a very simple shake and tumble, it does leave an impression with you. And that impression can range from, okay, that happened, to something that an individual would need to process a little bit. So, in a way, I guess this was me processing it. I kind of went through the gamut of all manner of emotions in response to it. From indifference to not indifference, from confusion to mild curiosity to some levity to some indifference, and then finding a little moment where, yeah, I definitely had a strong emotional response for a brief amount of time. So, regardless, hope you're all well. I'm well. I am ready to tackle my Saturday. And I wish you all a very beautiful, relaxing, and most importantly, when you can find the time for it, still moment in your day. Take care.